The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Welcome to the bonus show. As some of you know, I was recently interviewed on a New Zealand program called the Department of Conversation, and one of the things we discussed on the program was Jacinda Ardern's great response to coronavirus in New Zealand. Now, of course, we're all reasonable people. New Zealand is a country, an island country of a few million people. Their ability to do things is not the same as the United States, but that doesn't mean there aren't important things we can take from what happened in New Zealand and how well they dealt with it, not only from the standpoint of the medical side, but also the economic side. Well, Donald Trump has now been making a habit of talking about how other countries are now seeing second waves and other countries are a disaster and the U.S. is doing well. And with subsequent days, he's pointing to countries with even fewer and fewer cases. And most recently, he has called out New Zealand for its outbreak of coronavirus, saying that they now have a big surge in cases. But when you actually look at the data, Auckland had 9 cases of the virus on Monday, 13 on Tuesday, whereas the U.S. had 42,000. And of course, we talk about it in per capita terms normally, Pat. The numbers are so small in New Zealand that you can't even really do per capita. And he did this with Germany. He did this with a whole bunch of different countries. Do you think this will work? Like, will people simply hear him and accept it and not look at what the numbers are in these other countries? Because it's nothing compared to the United States.
I think this will work because people just take Trump's word as gospel. They don't fact check him. They think that he is the ultimate source of news and anything contradictory to him is fake news. So I think it can be persuasive. And you're right that he has this tendency to use percentages when really we should be looking at the raw numbers. And he uses raw numbers when we should be looking at the percentages. It's just one of those ways that you lie with statistics. Like with this, I mean, they went from having 0 cases to 13 cases. Let's say they went from having 1 case to 13 cases. Right. Trump could come out there and say that this is a 1,300% increase in New Zealand when it comes to coronavirus cases, which on percentage alone sounds absolutely crazy. But when you hear it's only 13 cases and they're, by the way, immediately going into a stage 3 lockdown, they're shutting down the city for 2 weeks, they're responding to it appropriately. It's not the same thing. It's not an inapt comparison.
This is another explanation for why, early testing per capita mattered. The fastest you could roll out testing capacity, the better you would suppress the spread of the virus. But if 100 countries deal with the virus and 80 get it under control and 20 don't, over time, the 20 that don't get it under control continue to have a higher testing need. So it would make sense that those 20 might have failed early because of not enough testing. 6 months in, they're still testing a lot and passing other countries because they still have such an acute need for testing. So with all of these, there's the right analysis of the data, and then there's the opposite, which is almost always what we get from Trump. And as you're pointing out, if you go from 1 to 10 cases, the percentage increase has been 1,000%. But the rule of small numbers tells us that we need to be careful about percentages when the numbers are so small.
Yeah, and of course, Trump is just going to ignore the fact that New Zealand didn't have any cases for a couple of months. They'll just leave that out of his analysis entirely. There's also this interesting story out of New Zealand where the prime minister wants to delay the next elections because of coronavirus. And they have a parliamentary system, so it's a lot different over there. If they decide that they're going to delay elections, it's not the same thing as Trump saying we should delay ours. But I wonder if he'll use that as justification to try to push the United States to delay our election here.
Right.
Even though it wouldn't be analogous at all, it wouldn't make sense to compare those two countries.
Not only that,
he'll also do that.
He's saying, look, we're not terrible like New Zealand. New Zealand is terrible on the virus. And by the way, let's do what they're doing on the election. We'll do that. If New Zealand did it, why wouldn't we? Well, because you said that on the virus, they're terrible, even though they're actually not. I mean, it doesn't, hypocrisy doesn't matter anymore, but they'll do it.
Yeah, here in the United States, we're kicking so much ass when it comes to the coronavirus that we can reopen the schools, we can allow sports to reopen, college football, get back out there on the field. But it's not so good. We actually are doing poorly enough to where we have to delay the election. How
it's incoherent.
Where those two things, I have no idea.
Completely incoherent. We are in the midst of all of this. So we've got coronavirus. We have a terrible economic situation. I think it was last week, although maybe it was the week before, I told you that we could be heading towards one of the worst hurricane seasons in history, with somewhere potentially around 25 or even closer to 30 named storms could be coming our way. Those may be starting very, very soon and could go into early October. I think the hurricane season goes. I believe.
That's
I don't
right.
remember
Yep.
exactly.
They say like August 10th to October 10th, something like that.
Something like that. And on top of that, we now are seeing record heat in parts of the country as well. The temperature at Death Valley National Park hit 130 degrees on Sunday. That might be the hottest temperature on Earth since 1913. And visitors to the park are being told to be prepared to survive. Essentially, travel into the park as if you were going into a survival situation. And we could be seeing, again, higher and higher temperatures, natural fires. Now, have you been to Death Valley, Pat? Is this one of the parks you've been to?
No, haven't been to Death Valley. I don't know if I'd even want to go if it's this hot. Is there even anything to really see out there? But I haven't been there.
My brother went, and he said it was hot. It was very hot. But this is just part of the continued temperature records that we're seeing in the United States. And of course, the advice in general during heat waves. We had one here that lasted about 10, 14 days in the Northeast. Finally, we got yesterday. It was like 70 something, which I loved. But the advice is very similar. Drink plenty of water. Carry extra water if you will be away from facilities. Avoid hiking and strenuous outdoor activity after 10 a.m. Be careful about air quality. Consider staying in. Consider finding a cooling station, etc. Obviously, if you're at Death Valley National Park, you're not going to find a cooling center like a senior center. But this is very serious stuff.
Yeah, I think even if you're into visiting Death Valley, you should do it right now.
I prefer to call it Valady. I like that.
Yeah, it's valid. It's valid. Death Valley. Yeah, you probably shouldn't do it right now. Maybe wait a few months if you're going to go venture out there.
Yeah.
Interesting how you said that it's the hottest that it's been since 1913. We're actually not sure about that because the metrics that they used back then to measure temperature may not have been all that reliable. So
right.
Apparently there was a measure of 134 degrees Fahrenheit. Now we're seeing 130. So this could actually be the record. We just don't know for sure. And it's amazing to me, too, that this is the hottest place in the world sometimes. Like, this is the hottest record in the entire world. I would think that maybe like the Sahara Desert or like somewhere in the Middle East would be hotter. But no, apparently it's right here in Death Valley, California.
I thought that some of those other places you mentioned often hit like 128, 126. But I guess I didn't necessarily know of a hotter place than Death Valley, but it's not shocking to me that it might be the hottest. But this is not the time to be doing that type of visit, I would say.
No, we'll delay that. I mean, you're not even supposed to be traveling at all, so
right,
it shouldn't be a problem for us. But I don't think Death Valley would be my destination right now.
What's your top park you haven't been to that's on your list now?
Glacier National Park up in Montana, I'd have to say. A lot of people say that that's the best national park. They'll say it's either that one or Yellowstone, which I have been to.
Right.
I know that a lot of Glacier is shut down right now because of the virus, because they don't want people crowding in those awesome scenic places. But I definitely have to get there at some point over the next few years.
How do you even get there? Like, what airport is closest?
I think there's, Missoula, but you can also, you can fly to like Seattle or Portland and make a whole road trip out of it too if you want to do that.
That would be great. I mean, pack a little Soylent, and then I think you're good. That's a party right there.
Yeah, you're gonna have to stock up on the Soylent once you get there. That's the only problem. Like, I can't fly with all the Soylent. Maybe I check it. If I check it, am I okay?
Oh yeah, you could check the Soylent, or you could send it ahead via UPS to your first stop and pick it up.
That's what most people do, I hear.
Is that true?
I don't know. I'm just joking.
Okay, all right, let's move on. Okay, on top of everything else, in California, this is like the bad news bears. This is just not good, not a good bonus show. There are more than 3 million electrical customers in California who may be facing blackouts. And the California power grid operator has canceled rolling blackouts for the time being. Widespread blackouts to reduce pressure on the electrical grid were just barely averted last night when regulators said we may not have the power. Why? Because of the heat wave we just talked about affecting Death Valley, also affecting California. And they lifted their emergency declaration right before 8 p.m. They were going to have to implement rotating outages, which could leave people without power for 2-hour stints. I remember this when I lived in Argentina. I moved to the US when I was 5. I remember this happening in Buenos Aires during the summer when AC usage would spike. And there would be times where we would have, as I recall, it would be a 4 or 6 hour blackout where we would just go to a different neighborhood and, go to a cafe, go to a park, go to a neighbor's house or whatever. I remember this from being a kid, and California just barely averting it, but it could come back depending on the temperatures that continue.
Yeah, and they were able to avert it because people got the message. They realized that we're going to have to limit our AC usage. We can still maybe have it on, but raise the temperature rather, and do like the basic things to conserve energy for a little while, and then they won't have to shut down our portion of the grid. And I mean, maybe it's inspiring in the sense that people were able to adhere to those messages and
Right.
followed the rules to the point where they didn't have to do that. Like, I mean, we're seeing now with coronavirus. We're doing such a terrible job as a nation because we're not listening to the guidelines. We're not wearing the masks. At least with this, there's a little bit of an inspiration because people were able to avoid that disaster scenario.
Yeah, I mean, it's like if they make an announcement and they say, okay, set your ACs to 77, no 72, no 68 for people who want it really cold. Set ACs to 77. Do not wash any clothes or run a dryer after 8 p.m., and we'll be able to get through this without it is the tragedy of the commons in the sense that if you think other people won't do it, you might say, well, I'm not going to do it either. Or if you think other people are going to do it, you'll say, I'll set it to 72 and it won't really make a difference. But people came together at least enough to stave off the blackout for one day.
Yeah, it's not rocket science. It's just coming together as a community. It's collective action. It's thinking about things other than yourself, and it's not as if like having the AC set to 77 or instead of 72 is going to be all that bad. You'll be able to survive that. You got to think about other people in your community. And maybe part of the reason why this worked was that it took place in a blue state like California, where a lot of people are, similarly minded to us on this stuff. Whereas if this happened in a red state, maybe it wouldn't work because you would have that tragedy of the commons sort of situation.
So we'll see what continues there. Of course, the brush fire situation, also at high risk in California, and they deal with that most summers at this point. And I try not to step into saying these acute events are because of climate change. I really step back and defer to science. And if science says over time we are seeing a warming trend, that's what I look at. An individual heat wave, I wouldn't immediately jump in and say, this is climate change, because there is some seasonality to these things. Even a 20-year period isn't that much. I defer to the science, and the science is that over the long term, over the very long term, we are seeing more carbon in the atmosphere and higher temperatures and melting ice. That's what I go to. I'm not so interested in saying this one thing is necessarily climate change. It might be, though.
Yeah, I think because it's easy to come up with counter arguments. Like if you have this disaster hurricane that wipes out a community, well, people can point to a hurricane that did the same thing 50 years ago and make it seem as though there's no climate change happening. You can do the same thing with a heat wave or these other events. And so, yeah, I think that's why looking big picture is the best argument moving forward, because that's a lot harder to contradict.
I hope you will join me again tonight at 8:45 p.m. Eastern Time for day 2 of the DNC. Friday, 6 p.m. Eastern, will be my first PogChamps chess match, and I will be playing at 6 p.m. against a user who streams under the name, I hope I'm saying this correctly, It's Hafu. And we will be playing a 2-game match where each of us will have a turn with the white pieces and with the black pieces, and that will be streamed Friday at 6 p.m., and I should be able to squeeze in 1 or 2 chess streams between now and then as well. What do you think, Pat?
Well, I have a serious question and a joke question. The serious question is, what if you split the games? Like, what if you win one and your opponent wins one? What happens then?
Well, this is round play like the World Cup, so we would each get points for a win. But I do think that in the case of a split, you also have a tiebreaker game in case there are ties in the future, which will be a shorter game.
Okay, and then my joke question, what's the Vegas odds on this? What's the over-under?
I'm not doing well.
Is that partly because you're not practicing because you're covering the DNC this week?
I'm not practicing as much as I would like to, but I'm also just not that good. But I am going to try to devote some time to practice for the rest of the week.
I'm pulling for you. We need to bring this championship home. It's going to be huge for the show.
Yeah.
It may even propel us to 1 million subscribers. Like, I mean, we're trying to get there before Election Day.
Yeah.
If you win the tournament, we could get there in a couple weeks, I think.
It could happen. It could happen. Yeah, no doubt about it. So I'm going to be, I hope people are pulling for me. I'll be working very, very hard. That does it for today. Stream tonight, DNC Day 2, new show tomorrow. Alex Moore's scheduled to join us by popular demand, and new bonus show all tomorrow.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.